A white racist and corrupt cop handcuffed and kicked a black woman for no reason, but what he didn't know was that she was an undercover FBI agent. And what happened next shocked everyone. It started at a high-profile charity gala, an event where the polished marble floors reflected the shine of $1,000 shoes, and champagne glasses clinked in carefully curated hands. The kind of place where appearances mattered more than facts, and where being black in a space like that drew attention before a single word was spoken. When she walked in, elegant and composed, all it took was a glance, a murmur, a whisper passed from one entitled guest to another before someone called security. One lie. One assumption. One phone call to the police that would ignite the humiliation of a lifetime. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was invited. She was qualified. She belonged there. But none of that mattered. When the officer arrived, it was like throwing gasoline on a quiet flame. He walked in like he owned the air in the room, shoulders squared, eyes sharp, arrogance radiating off his badge. No greetings. No inquiry. Just suspicion thick in his voice the moment he spoke. "Excuse me," he said, eyes scanning her up and down like she was a threat, not a guest. "You need to come with me." "For what?" she asked, keeping her voice calm, composed. "I have an invitation. I checked in at the front desk." "I said come with me," he snapped, louder now, drawing attention from the room. "We've had a report about someone matching your description trespassing." She reached into her clutch slowly, carefully, to pull out the invite, but before she could even show it, he grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully behind her back. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as the champagne glass in her other hand fell and shattered on the marble. She tried to speak, to explain, but he was already pulling her toward the exit, handcuffing her in the middle of the ballroom, pressing her against a wall covered in gold-plated donors' names. "What the hell are you doing?" she finally managed to say, eyes wide, voice trembling, not from fear, but from rage held barely in place. "You know damn well what I'm doing," he growled in her ear. "People like you don't belong here. People like you." That was it. That was the sentence that flipped the world upside down. That was the sentence that turned this from an arrest into a public lynching of dignity. The room was silent. No one moved. Some turned their eyes away. Some filmed. But not a single person stood up for her. Not even the ones who smiled when she walked in. She was pushed out of the gala into the cold night air, still in heels, still in cuffs. He shoved her into the back of the police car like she was nothing. Humiliation burned in her throat, but she didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just looked at him. Memorized his face. Took in every detail. Because the moment he touched her, he sealed his own fate. He didn't ask for ID. Didn't run her name. Didn't know who she really was. And that would cost him everything. See, she wasn't just a guest at the gala. She wasn't just someone trying to fit in. She was someone on a mission. Someone deep inside an operation far bigger than anyone in that room could have guessed. And now, the very man who dragged her out like trash had just handed her the leverage she never knew she needed. He threw her into a cell. Left her overnight. No charge. No explanation. When she was released the next morning, still wearing the same dress, heels scuffed, wrists bruised, she didn't cry. She didn't storm the precinct. She went silent. Cold. Focused. She picked up her phone, made a single call, and disappeared. Because now it wasn't just about the case she was working. Now, it was personal. What this officer didn't know, what no one in that precinct had the faintest idea about, was that the woman they humiliated in front of hundreds was an elite undercover FBI agent. And every step he took, every word he said, every order he gave that night, had been recorded. Documented. Stored. And it was about to be used against him. He thought he could get away with it. That his badge gave him power. That his arrogance made him untouchable. But what happens when someone you thought was beneath you suddenly becomes the person holding your entire career in their hands? What happens when the target becomes the hunter? This story is about more than revenge. It's about identity, dignity, and the danger of underestimating the wrong person. It's about how one moment of unchecked hate can destroy a life, or your own. The city would never forget what happened that night. And neither would he. But here's what no one saw coming. When she revealed who she truly was, and what she had been sent there to uncover, even the FBI didn't see it coming. So now the question is, what exactly did she find inside that precinct that changed everything? And what did she do, that made the world stop and watch? To every black viewer watching this video right now, we see you, we stand with you, and we support you. At Plow of Twist, we condemn all forms of racism, prejudice, and injustice, no exceptions. Your voice matters. Your life matters. And your story deserves to be told with truth, dignity, and strength. Now, sit back and prepare for a powerful story that flips the script and delivers the justice we all hope to see. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to Plow of Twist and join a community that believes in stories that matter. Enjoy the story. The city of Charlotte, North Carolina, was the kind of place where the illusion of progress often dressed itself in silence. Clean buildings, thriving businesses, vibrant neighborhoods split by unspoken boundaries. On one side of town, wealth flowed like an open faucet, corporate towers, rooftop bars, art galleries with minimalism priced in thousands. On the other side, the sidewalks cracked, the buses ran late, and potential fought daily against the weight of circumstance. The people who moved through those streets knew how to endure. They knew what it felt like to be questioned before they spoke, to be watched before they moved, to be defined before they even entered a room. And yet, they kept rising. One of them had risen farther than most would ever imagine. Her name was Amara Bennett. 34 years old. Daughter of a schoolteacher and a Vietnam vet. Born and raised in West Charlotte, in a one-story brick home with a porch swing and the scent of her mother's Sunday cornbread drifting through the cracked windows every week. She had grown up watching her parents balance bills with quiet dignity, watching her father tuck in his uniform and never miss a day of work, even when his back ached and his pride burned from the things people whispered at the gas station when they didn't think he could hear. She watched her mother grade papers until midnight and still wake up at 5 a.m. to braid Amara's hair, pack her lunch, and pray over her with a conviction that gave the house warmth, even in the dead of winter. Amara was not the loudest girl in class, nor the most outgoing. She was observant. Measured. Sharp in the way she listened. She learned early on that knowledge was power, and silence could be a weapon when wielded with intention. By the time she turned 17, she'd graduated valedictorian of her high school, turned down several Ivy League offers, and chosen instead to attend North Carolina A&T, the same university where her parents met. She didn't want prestige, she wanted purpose. Criminal justice, psychology, behavioral analysis. Every step of her education was calculated, strategic. She wasn't just trying to be someone. She was preparing to become something that could navigate the world most people never saw, and make sure the right people were held accountable within it. By 28, she was already a senior field agent in the FBI. She had spent 6 years moving through corridors where her presence was met with skepticism and condescension. She'd sat in meetings where her ideas were repeated louder by men who got credit. She'd knocked down doors, tracked traffickers, infiltrated white-collar crime rings. She'd been promoted, but always just slowly enough to remind her she wasn't one of them. She was black. She was a woman. And she was excellent. That was a combination people weren't always ready to accept. But Amara didn't need anyone to accept her. She just needed them to underestimate her. That was where she found her power. In silence. In surprise. In knowing what others didn't. Her latest assignment had been unlike anything else. The Bureau had received multiple complaints about discriminatory patterns in law enforcement across Mecklenburg County, specifically among elite officers who were quietly protected by a web of bureaucratic connections and political handshakes. Whispers of planted evidence, wrongful arrests, excessive force swept under rugs too thick with years of neglect. There were names. Patterns. And one name came up more often than the rest. Detective Cole Henderson. Cole was the embodiment of what happened when charm and corruption grew up in the same body. Late 30s, square jaw, former college quarterback turned street cop, now a decorated detective known for his zero-tolerance style. To some, he was a local hero, quick to act, tough on crime, and proudly old school. But to many, especially in the communities he patrolled, he was a menace in uniform. Smooth enough to keep himself protected, brutal enough to leave lasting damage. His arrest record was steeped in racially charged disparities. Internal complaints were frequent, but always buried, dismissed, or mysteriously withdrawn. The man had friends in high places and enemies with no voice. Amara's job was to go deep. Not just observe, embed. That meant creating a cover, attending local events, slipping unnoticed into the world Cole believed he ruled. It also meant bait. Not just watching from the sidelines, but stepping into the line of fire, drawing out the worst in him, forcing a mistake that couldn't be swept away. That was why she agreed to attend the gala. A charity event hosted by the city's wealthiest to raise funds for policing initiatives, attended by local dignitaries, donors, law enforcement elites. It was the perfect place to watch Cole, perfect, because he wouldn't expect to be watched. Amara entered the event prepared. She had memorized her backstory, donned a midnight blue gown sleek enough to blend, heels high enough to demand space, and confidence that came not from arrogance but from truth. She carried no weapon. Just a purse, her FBI credentials tucked deep beneath a false name and a high-limit donor badge. She didn't come to provoke. She came to observe. But someone else had already made a decision. A white woman near the bar narrowed her eyes the moment Amara walked past. Whispered to a security guard. No proof, no confrontation, just a complaint, that she looked out of place, that she might have snuck in. The guard didn't know better. He made a call. And that's when Cole arrived. He didn't enter casually. He came in like a storm that thought it was invited. His eyes scanned the crowd, zeroed in on her like radar. Amara had trained for pressure, for tension, for being made. But what came next wasn't strategic, it was personal. He walked up, demanded she identify herself. She tried to hand him her invitation. He knocked it from her hand. She tried to speak. He raised his voice. "You think dressing like them makes you one of them?" he said through a smirk, loud enough for others to hear. "Let's go. You've had your little moment." She asked calmly, again, to speak to the event coordinator. He grabbed her by the wrist. Twisted it behind her back. "You people always gotta make things complicated." Gasps echoed across the room, but no one stopped him. No one moved. She felt the cold metal of the handcuffs bite into her skin. Her breath stayed steady, her chin high. But inside was something ancient. Rage shaped by centuries. Not the kind that explodes. The kind that remembers. He dragged her through the ballroom as if she were a criminal. Her heels scraped against the polished floor. Her dignity hung in the air like smoke. Phones recorded. Eyes widened. But not one voice called it what it was. Cole didn't know. He didn't know who she was. What she could do. What she had already seen. What she was carrying in that moment, inside her mind, in her records, in the device sewn into the lining of her dress. He locked her in a holding cell without charge. Left her there overnight. Called it a misunderstanding the next morning. No apology. No paperwork. Just a smirk. "You're lucky I let you go," he said. "Be careful where you show up next time." She walked out of that station bruised, physically and otherwise. But she didn't look back. She went home. Sat in silence. Unpacked every emotion in the quiet of her apartment, the shame, the fury, the betrayal. She'd lived her whole life trying to be the one who changed the system from within. That night, the system made it personal. What he didn't know was that he had just handed her everything. She had what she needed now. Not just a pattern. Not just statistics. She had first-hand experience. She had his voice. She had the recording. She had the proof that no one could deny. But she wasn't going to rush. No. She was going to dismantle him piece by piece, the same way people like him had dismantled communities for decades. Cole Henderson wasn't just going to be exposed. He was going to face the weight of everything he thought would never touch him. And as the wheels began turning behind closed doors, as files opened, as connections were traced, one question began to rise: what exactly did Amara find inside that precinct the morning after she was released? Something so damaging, so incriminating, that it could take down more than just one corrupt cop. Because the deeper she dug, the darker the truth became. The next morning, Amara sat alone at her dining table, the sunlight creeping through the blinds casting faint lines across the bruises on her wrists. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful, it was thick, loaded. Her phone buzzed once. Then again. Colleagues. Supervisors. Updates. But she didn't answer. Her thoughts were a storm, fast, violent, contained only by the years of discipline carved into her by experience. What had happened at the gala wasn't just a personal violation. It had compromised everything: her cover, her control, her carefully calculated distance. But most of all, it had revealed something she'd always known, but had never allowed herself to feel so viscerally: how quickly a black woman's identity could be stripped in front of a room full of people, and how easily that room would let it happen. Later that afternoon, Amara entered the regional FBI office under a different name, with a scarf covering her wrist and her hair pulled tight into a bun that signaled business, not apology. She requested a closed meeting with Assistant Director Naomi Wallace, the woman overseeing the Internal Affairs Task Force that had sent her into Charlotte in the first place. Naomi, in her mid-50s, with silver-streaked dreadlocks and eyes that had seen more betrayals than successes in the system, looked up from her tablet as Amara stepped in. "You didn't check in last night," Naomi said flatly. "You were supposed to send status by 11. Amara sat down, slid a flash drive across the table, and met Naomi's gaze without blinking. "That's because I spent the night in a holding cell." Naomi didn't react right away. She leaned back slightly, brow raised. "You're joking." "I wish I were." Naomi took the drive and plugged it into her tablet. As the audio began, muffled voices, crowd chatter, then the cold, unmistakable tone of Cole Henderson ordering Amara to turn around, the room seemed to lose its temperature. Naomi paused the recording just as the sound of metal cuffs clicked into place. "He didn't know who you were?" Naomi asked. "No. He never checked. Never asked for ID. Just grabbed me. Said someone like me didn't belong." Naomi exhaled slowly. "We knew he was dirty. We didn't know he was this bold." "That's not bold," Amara replied. "That's untouchable." They both sat in silence for a long moment. Then Naomi leaned forward, fingers steepled. "We were close to pulling you. Thought it might be too risky. But now," she looked at the screen again, then back at Amara, "now we're taking the gloves off." The following days were layered with intensity. Amara was granted full operational clearance to conduct an unrestricted surveillance initiative on Cole Henderson and his closest associates. What had started as a passive infiltration had turned into an active mission. But Amara wasn't just looking for policy violations or excessive force complaints, she was looking for rot. For the decay underneath the badge. And she started finding it. She tracked Cole's off-duty meetings, bars where he met with city contractors, whispered names over whiskey, exchanged envelopes like relics of old deals. She found footage from dash cams mysteriously deactivated minutes before high-risk arrests. She found body cam logs edited at times that didn't match patrol logs. And she found names. Names of young men, mostly black, some Latino, whose records were tainted by mysteriously timed evidence fines, unfiled complaints, anonymous tips that led to their arrests and years in jail for minor or fabricated infractions. She kept her distance. Watched. Collected. But as the evidence piled up, so did the unease. Cole wasn't just one man. He was a network. And he was protected. Then came the day she walked into the community legal clinic on East 12th Street. It wasn't in her original scope, but something told her to follow the paper trail deeper. She met a paralegal named Jamal, who at first refused to talk. Too many people had come asking. Too many promises. But when she showed him her badge, when she said she was the woman who'd been dragged out of the gala and no one said a word, he opened the door. My cousin, Jamal began. He was 16. Pulled over on his bike. They said he had drugs. He didn't. My aunt tried to fight it. Cole showed up at her house. Next day, she dropped the complaint. Not because she wanted to. Because she was scared. Scared of what? Amara asked. Not what. Who? Scared of Cole. Scared of what he has on people. Scared of what happens when the law forgets who it's supposed to protect. The deeper she went, the more chilling the details became. Cole wasn't just enforcing the law, he was orchestrating it to serve his own power. A developer looking to clear a neighborhood for new condos. Arrests went up. Street sweeps happened in precise blocks. Noise complaints filed on the hour. Black families evicted over code violations while white-owned properties remained untouched. Amara documented everything. Sent files and encrypted batches to Naomi. Created timelines. Mapped patterns. But still, something was missing. Something critical. She needed the link between Cole and City Hall. The part that would explain how he kept getting away with it. That opportunity came unexpectedly. One evening, during a surveillance run near a downtown bar known for being a watering hole for city officials, Amara spotted Cole entering through the back. He wasn't alone. With him was Councilman Jeremy Roston, a man whose public record showed zero tolerance for police misconduct and regular speeches about equity and reform. The two men disappeared into a back room. Amara activated her listening device, but the signal was weak. Later that night, she reviewed partial audio. Enough to hear one line, from Roston's voice, low and grave, "You keep this clean. No more mistakes like that woman at the gala." Cole replied, "She's not who you think she is." Something cracked open in Amara then. He suspected. He was watching now, too. The next morning, her apartment door had been unlocked. Nothing taken. Just the sense of being followed. A threat without words. A reminder that she was not invisible. She contacted Naomi immediately. "He's on to me. We'll pull you." "No. Not yet. Amara, this is no longer controlled. I'm close. There's something else. Something I'm missing. Let me find it." Naomi hesitated, then agreed. One more week. In that week, Amara didn't sleep. She pushed deeper, followed Cole to a private event at a warehouse, city officials, officers, men in tailored suits who never wore uniforms. No press. No oversight. What she saw there wasn't just corruption. It was a system. It was organized. Calculated. Protected by silence and fear. And then, she found the folder. It was buried in the digital logs of an evidence room Cole had access to. A record of falsified evidence entries. Names, dates, items logged that never existed. One entry stood out, a file logged under a name she recognized. A young man who had died in custody. Ruled a suicide. But the timestamp on the evidence was 1 day after his death. And it was signed by Cole. That was it. She had everything now. She sent the final report to Naomi with one note: "This goes public in 48 hours unless I say otherwise." And then, she waited. Waited for Cole to make his next move. Because now it wasn't just about exposure. It was about confrontation. And Amara knew, he was going to come for her. But what neither of them knew was just how far the truth would reach once it was released. What would happen when the world saw exactly who Cole Henderson really was? And how would he react when he realized the woman he tried to break was the one sent to break him? The sound of footsteps echoed through the narrow hallway of the precinct, slow, deliberate, each step pressing into the worn linoleum floor like a countdown. The walls were the same dull beige they had always been, the kind that sucked the color out of everything around it, but this time they felt colder, more hollow. Amara walked with calm precision, a folder tucked under her arm, her blazer perfectly pressed, her expression unreadable. Every movement was intentional, like she was pacing toward a moment she had envisioned in every detail. Outside, the late afternoon sun was beginning to fall, casting long shadows through the windows. Inside, the air was thick with a kind of anticipation no one could name. She stepped into the common room where officers gathered between calls, the murmur of casual conversation fading the moment her heels touched the tile. A few heads turned, a few eyes lingered, uncertain but curious. She didn't speak to them. She didn't need to. Her destination was clear. The glass-walled office in the far corner. The one that belonged to Detective Cole Henderson. He was inside, leaning back in his chair with the kind of arrogance that had calcified over years of unchecked power. His eyes met hers through the glass, and for a brief moment, something flickered. Not recognition, he already knew who she was, but tension. The kind of tension that comes when a predator realizes it might have underestimated its prey. She opened the door without knocking and closed it gently behind her. He didn't stand. "So," he said, voice smooth like poison. "You finally decided to stop hiding." Amara placed the folder on his desk, still standing. "I don't need to hide from men like you, Cole." His smirk faltered just slightly before settling back into place. "That right? Is this the part where you threatened to expose me?" "No," she replied. "That part already happened." He leaned forward then, his hands folding on the desk. "You think you're smarter than me? That you came into my house and outplayed me? But you don't understand how this city works. You think just because you've got a badge and some recordings, people are going to care. They don't need to care," she said quietly, opening the folder and pulling out a single sheet. "They just need to see this." She laid it on the desk in front of him. It was a printed still image from a security feed, Cole meeting Councilman Roston, the timestamp clear. But it wasn't the meeting that mattered. It was what Roston handed him. An envelope. Thick. Unmarked. And the angle of the camera made it impossible to deny. His jaw tightened. "That doesn't prove anything." "It proves enough," Amara said. "Enough to open a formal investigation. Enough to freeze your assets. Enough to subpoena every case you've touched in the last 8 years." He rose from his chair then, slowly, his voice lowering to a gravelly growl. "You're making a mistake." Amara didn't move. Her voice remained calm, but it hit like thunder. "The mistake was yours. You thought dragging me out of that gala would be the end of something. But it was the beginning." His nostrils flared, his fists clenched. "You don't know what you're walking into. You think you've won, but you haven't even scratched the surface. I've got judges in my pocket. I've got DAs who owe me favors. I'm not just a cop. I am this system." "No," she said. "You're a parasite. And your time's up." He took a step toward her, and for a brief second, the air between them crackled with the memory of that night, the cuffs, the pressure on her spine, the humiliation. But she didn't flinch. She looked him dead in the eyes. "Touch me again, and the cuffs go on you this time." The office door opened then. Naomi stepped in, flanked by 2 federal agents in suits. Cole's eyes darted to them, and for the first time, the smirk faded completely. "You remember Assistant Director Wallace, don't you?" Amara said softly. Naomi's voice cut through the tension like ice. "Cole Henderson, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, falsifying police reports, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent, you can't be serious," he snapped. "You're making a mistake. You don't have jurisdiction here." Naomi nodded toward the agents. "We do now." One of the agents stepped forward and pulled out a pair of cuffs, the same model Cole had used 1,000 times before. This time, they clicked shut around his own wrists. "You think this is gonna stick?" he said as they began to walk him out. "I'll walk in a week. You think anyone's gonna testify against me?" Amara stepped into his path. Her voice was low. "They already have." He stared at her, the fight leaving his body slowly, like a fire losing oxygen. For a second, he looked less like a monster and more like a man who realized too late that the game had changed. As he was escorted through the precinct, the silence from the officers around him was deafening. Some looked away. Some watched with blank expressions. But 1 or 2, just enough, nodded slightly as Amara passed by. Not in celebration. In acknowledgement. Quiet recognition of a storm that had finally reached its target. Hours later, back in the hotel room that had served as her off-the-record headquarters, Amara stood by the window overlooking the city. Naomi sat on the couch, reviewing the signed statements, the final batch of sealed files ready for federal submission. "You did it," Naomi said. Amara shook her head. "We're not done." "No," Naomi agreed. "But today, we won." A knock came at the door. Jamal entered, holding a flash drive. "You'll want to see this," he said. She took it and plugged it into her laptop. The video loaded, a recorded deposition from a former officer under Cole's command. He detailed the system Cole had built, how he leveraged arrests to manipulate property values, how he threatened families into silence, how he buried evidence with help from inside the courts. Amara leaned back, eyes fixed on the screen. This wasn't just Cole. This was bigger. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous. And as the screen dimmed and the weight of what was coming settled in, she whispered more to herself than anyone else in the room, "They thought they could bury us in silence. But they forgot, we know how to speak in storms." The reckoning had begun. But what waited at the center of this storm, was still unknown. The rain started quietly that night, a soft, steady rhythm against the windows as the city held its breath. Inside the federal conference room on the 6th floor of a government building that most people never noticed, Amara sat across from the man who, until a few hours ago, believed himself untouchable. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one inside this room. Cole sat cuffed to the metal chair, a far cry from the polished authority he wore like armor in his precinct office. His shirt was slightly rumpled, his jaw clenched, but his eyes still clung to defiance, flickering between resentment and disbelief. He didn't understand how it had come to this. He hadn't yet accepted that it was over. Amara sat still, hands folded on the table, her body calm, but her mind razor-sharp. She had requested this conversation. Not out of vengeance. Out of necessity. This wasn't just about putting a corrupt man behind bars. It was about extracting the final truth, pulling the poison out from where it hid. She studied his face for a long moment before speaking. When she did, her voice was low, steady, deliberate. "You built your career on the belief that people like me wouldn't fight back," she said, her eyes fixed on his. "That we were disposable. Replaceable. Easily silenced. But what you never counted on was someone watching you just closely enough to remember every word. Every action. Every time you looked a mother in the eyes and lied to her about why her son wasn't coming home. Cole scoffed and looked away, but there was something in his silence now, a hesitation, a sliver of awareness that this wasn't going to end with a press release or a quiet reassignment. Amara leaned forward. "You think this is about what you did to me at that gala?" she asked, her voice growing firmer. "That was just the beginning. That was the moment the curtain slipped, and I saw the machinery behind your arrogance. The real question is, how long have you been doing this? How many kids? How many families?" He finally spoke, voice low and tight. "You think you're better than me? You walk in here, act like you're some kind of savior. You're still working for a system that was never built for you either." She paused, studying him. "You're right. It wasn't. But here's the difference. I've spent my life trying to change it. You've spent yours making sure it never does." He laughed bitterly. "You think the people upstairs care? The ones cutting checks? They sent you in like a sacrificial lamb. You got lucky. That's all. If that camera had been 1 inch to the left, you'd be in a cell and I'd still be shaking hands with councilmen." She shook her head slowly. "It wasn't luck. It was preparation. It was patience. And it was everyone you stepped on thinking no one would ever stand up for them. They're standing now." Cole leaned back, the metal of the cuffs clinking against the table. "You think you're gonna burn me and that's gonna be enough? The people I worked with, the people I protected, they're not just gonna fall. They'll adapt. You don't win this war with headlines. You win it with silence and fear." Amara looked him straight in the eyes, her voice quiet but laced with steel. "Then why are you the one in cuffs, Cole?" The door opened, and Naomi entered, holding a stack of documents. She placed them on the table in front of Amara and glanced at Cole. "The grand jury's in. We have indictments on 3 more officers connected to the false evidence network. And Councilman Roston's being escorted from his home as we speak." Cole's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." Naomi didn't smile. "We don't bluff, Mr. Henderson. We build cases. Thoroughly." There was a shift in him then. A tremor. He looked at the documents like they were laced with poison. "You don't get it," he muttered. "There are layers you haven't touched. I was just one piece." "Then start talking," Naomi said. "And maybe, just maybe, you'll have a sliver of a future." But Cole didn't respond. He looked at Amara again, and for the first time, she saw something behind his eyes that wasn't pride or hatred or entitlement. It was fear. Not the kind that came from consequences. The kind that came from knowing the world you built is about to collapse and there's no one left to catch you. She stood up slowly, gathering the folder and stepping back from the table. "You won't be remembered for your medals or your arrests," she said, voice calm. "You'll be remembered for the lives you ruined. For the fear you planted in children. For the silence you forced on families. That's your legacy, Cole." He looked at her, jaw tight. "You think you changed something?" "I know I did." She walked out, leaving Naomi behind to finish the details. The hallway was quiet as she moved through it, but her steps were lighter now. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds still hung low, but there was a break in them, a hint of light filtering through. She stepped into the parking lot, phone already buzzing. Journalists. Advocates. Survivors. Her inbox overflowing with voices ready to be heard. She didn't answer any of them yet. She needed a moment. Jamal was waiting by her car, hands in his pockets, eyes tired but hopeful. She nodded at him, and he gave a small smile. "It's happening, isn't it?" he asked. "It started," she replied. "But it's far from over." He looked at her for a moment, then asked quietly, "Do you ever wonder if it'll actually change?" She paused, looked out over the city, and then back at him. It already is. As they stood in that parking lot, the weight of generations hung in the air, but so did the promise of something new. Not redemption. Not erasure. But recognition. Accountability. Truth. The kind that doesn't come easy, doesn't come quickly, but when it does, it cuts clean through silence like thunder through the sky. Inside the federal building, the gears continued to turn. More names would fall. More truths would surface. But this chapter, this moment, belonged to her. And somewhere deep inside, even Cole knew it. The storm had passed. But the reckoning had just begun. 2 days after Cole Henderson was led out of the precinct in handcuffs, Charlotte was no longer the same city. What once was kept in the dark corners of back rooms and silent agreements had spilled out into every corner of the local news cycle, into neighborhood conversations, into whispered acknowledgments from people who had once looked the other way. The footage of his arrest, of Amara standing behind him calm and composed while federal agents escorted him out, had made its way across every major platform. But what kept the story burning wasn't just the image, it was what came after. The names. The connections. The documents. And the undeniable truth that what Cole had done wasn't an isolated crime, it was a symptom of something much larger. Inside the FBI's regional command center, the pace hadn't slowed. Naomi had initiated a full-scale audit of Mecklenburg County's internal affairs process, calling for digital forensics, case file re-examinations, and scheduled interviews with officers, community members, and survivors whose complaints had been silenced over the years. Amara, though visibly tired, kept working through it all. Her role had shifted, not from agent to hero, but from investigator to witness. And being a witness to this kind of unraveling required a different kind of strength. It meant revisiting evidence that was already familiar but now seen through a lens of consequence. It meant understanding that with every stone she turned, more rot might rise to the surface. But it wasn't just legal shifts happening. There was emotional residue left behind, consequences that couldn't be contained within courtrooms or paperwork. Amara had to face those too. She met with families whose pain had been buried for years beneath closed cases and fabricated reports. She listened as mothers recounted the moments they realized no one was coming to help them, how they taught their sons to make themselves small when officers passed by, how they carried guilt for not being able to protect them from a system designed to break them. These meetings weren't for evidence. They were for truth. For reckoning. For dignity. And Amara carried each one like a thread in a much larger fabric she was now responsible for stitching back together. Then there was the press. Cameras followed her when she left the building, reporters called her name like she was a symbol, a savior, a force. But Amara didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had been forced to fight in a war she never wanted and won a battle that only exposed more fronts. Still, she knew this was the cost. Visibility came with weight, and she had spent her life preparing to carry it. What she hadn't prepared for was the fracture in her own beliefs. For years, she had clung to the idea that the system, though flawed, could be steered toward justice from the inside. Now, staring at the scale of corruption, the depth of complicity, she began to wonder whether reform was truly possible, or if something more drastic was needed. Late one evening, Amara stood on the rooftop of the federal building, looking out over the city she had once called home. Naomi joined her, carrying 2 coffees, handing one over without a word. They stood in silence for a while, the skyline glowing under the early fall haze. Naomi finally spoke, voice quiet. "You changed something real this week." Amara didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was distant. "Did I? Or did I just rip the bandage off something that's been festering for decades?" Naomi turned to her. "Sometimes ripping the bandage is the only way to let something heal. But healing doesn't mean pretending the wound was never there." Amara nodded slowly. "It's just. I thought I knew how deep it went. I didn't. I thought Cole was the bottom. But now I see he was just a surface. A shield. And now you have a choice, Naomi said. You can hand this off. Let the rest of us carry it. Or you can keep digging. But either way, you need to know this isn't your burden to bear alone. Amara looked down at her hands, the same ones that had once gripped a badge with pride. I'm not sure the badge means what I thought it did anymore. It means what you make it mean, Naomi replied. It never carried justice on its own. People do that. People like you. The next day, Amara sat across from Jamal again. This time, in a private room within a community center filled with residents organizing a town hall. He had become an unlikely anchor in this whirlwind, a civilian who had trusted her when others hadn't, and who was now helping rally families for testimonies. He handed her a folder, thick with affidavits and timelines. There's more, he said. People are finally ready to speak. But some of them don't trust the Bureau. They trust you. Amara nodded, taking the folder. I understand. He paused, then asked, do you? She looked at him. I mean, do you really understand what it means to carry all this? What if they don't want reform? What if they want justice their own way? Amara took a deep breath. Then we have to give them space to speak. Even if it's uncomfortable. Even if it shakes the walls of everything you believe in. She nodded. Especially then. The town hall happened 3 days later, in a packed high school gym with folding chairs and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. People came. Not just victims. Community leaders. Teachers. Clergy. Former officers. They stood in line, waited for the microphone, and shared their truths. It wasn't just about Cole anymore. It was about the entire structure that had allowed him to rise, to operate, to destroy. And Amara, seated at the front table with Naomi and a few other federal representatives, listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't defend. She just listened. And as the stories piled up, so did the question, what comes next? After the final speaker, an older man with a trembling voice and a police badge in his pocket, Amara stood. The room quieted. I can't undo what's been done, she said. And I won't stand here and make promises that justice will come quickly. But I can tell you this, your voices have been heard. And this time, they won't be buried. There was no applause. Just silence. And then, slowly, nods. People absorbing the weight of what had been spoken into the room. Later that night, back in her apartment, Amara opened a letter slipped under her door. No return address. Inside was a photo. A boy. Maybe 12. His face was bruised, his eyes hollow. On the back, a single line, he never made it home. She didn't know who sent it. She didn't need to. She understood. The fight wasn't over. It had only changed shape. But now, she was no longer alone. And what came next, would test everything she believed in. The city moved slower now, as if it, too, was processing everything that had unfolded. In the aftermath of the storm, there was a strange stillness, but it was not peace. It was the kind of silence that follows a scream, the silence where questions begin to rise, where people look around and wonder what remains and what must be rebuilt from the wreckage. Inside her office, Amara sat at her desk long after everyone else had gone home. The lights were low, the only illumination coming from the city's orange glow beyond the window. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages, alerts, updates, but she let them pile up for a while. She was holding the photo from the letter again, the boy's face staring back at her with eyes that had seen too much. She turned it over, read the words again, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the weight of it all crack something inside her. The door creaked open, and Naomi stepped in, carrying a second cup of coffee in her hand. She didn't ask if Amara needed it, she just placed it on the desk and sat down quietly across from her. There were no formalities between them anymore. No ranks. Just two women who knew what it meant to carry the cost of truth. He had a name, Amara finally said, her voice low. The boy. His name was Elijah Ward. He was arrested 2 years ago on suspicion of assault. He never stood trial. Died in custody. The report said suicide. His family tried to get answers but were denied access to footage, autopsy records, everything. It was all buried. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. And now? Now we know the entry logs for the evidence room were altered. Cole signed in the next day and logged an item under Elijah's name that didn't exist in the original case file. That's the moment they covered it up. That's when the truth was erased. Naomi's voice was heavy. What do you want to do? Amara didn't answer right away. She was staring at the wall, but her mind was far from the room. I want to bring this to light. I want people to know who he was. That he didn't deserve to be forgotten. But I also know if we do this publicly, it's going to break that family all over again. Naomi leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. That's the dilemma, isn't it? Truth versus pain. Sometimes they walk hand in hand. Amara finally looked at her. We talk about justice like it's clean. Like it's a straight line from wrong to right. But it's not. It's messy. It's complicated. And sometimes the truth does more damage before it does any good. Naomi nodded slowly. That's why we don't walk into it alone. The next morning, Amara met Elijah's mother. Her name was Patrice. She wore a navy coat with buttons that had been sewn back on by hand, and her eyes held the quiet restraint of someone who'd been forced to be strong for too long. They sat in a small meeting room at the bureau, no cameras, no microphones. Just the two of them. Amara explained everything gently, methodically. She laid out the timeline, the tampered files, the evidence they had recovered. Patrice didn't say a word for the first few minutes. She just listened, holding her purse in her lap, her fingers gently gripping the edges like it was the only thing grounding her. When Amara finally paused, Patrice spoke, her voice cracked and low. Do you know how many times I was told I was crazy? That I was making things up? That my son was just another troubled kid? I wrote letters. I begged for meetings. I stood outside the courthouse for weeks. No one listened. Amara reached across the table. I'm listening now. Patrice's eyes filled but didn't spill. Do I get to see it? The file? Amara nodded and slid it across the table. Patrice opened it, slowly flipping through the pages. Her hand trembled as she reached a photo, Elijah's intake photo, time-stamped, face bruised, expression blank. She stared at it for a long time before speaking again. I want to speak, she said. At the next public hearing. I want them to know who he was. I want them to hear my voice this time. Amara felt something inside her settle. We'll make sure you have that platform. That moment became a pivot. The next hearing was scheduled within the week. News had spread that more files were being declassified. More names were emerging. But this time, the spotlight wasn't on Cole. It was on the victims. And Patrice would be the one to open the session. On the day of the hearing, the room was packed. Local officials, federal staff, journalists, and citizens filled every chair, with more standing in the back. Amara stood behind the curtain, watching Patrice step up to the microphone. There was no preamble. No ceremony. Just a mother with a paper in her hands and pain in her voice. My son was 12 when he learned not to run when he saw a police car, she began. He was 16 when he was arrested. 17 when he died. And for 2 years, I've been told to move on. But I will never move on from the moment I saw him in that casket. The truth matters. Not just for him. But for every mother like me, who goes to bed praying her child makes it home and wakes up to find out he didn't. There was silence in the room, heavy and raw. Amara felt her chest tighten, her breath caught between pride and sorrow. When Patrice stepped down, she passed by Amara, their eyes locking for a second, no words needed. That look said everything. That night, Naomi invited Amara to her apartment. They sat in her kitchen, sharing a quiet dinner, the kind that felt like a breath after a marathon. Naomi looked at her and said, "You know what this means, don't you? You're not just an agent anymore. Not in their eyes. You're a symbol now. People are going to expect you to keep speaking. To keep fighting." Amara nodded slowly. "And I will. But I won't be the only one." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, not filled with reports, but with proposals. Community programs. Youth initiatives. A plan to partner with local organizations and build a bridge between the communities that had been hurt and the institutions that were supposed to protect them. Naomi smiled softly. "You never stop, do you?" Amara looked down at the folder. "I can't afford to." As the week closed, indictments were issued for more officers, including a high-ranking supervisor who had signed off on dozens of falsified arrest warrants. The mayor publicly announced a new oversight commission. And through it all, Amara remained steady, present, visible, not for glory, but for truth. Still, there was one more conversation she had to have. One more thread left dangling. She visited Cole one final time, this time at the detention facility where he was being held pending trial. He looked different now. Smaller. Not physically, but in presence. The arrogance was gone. The shield of power stripped away. He looked up as she entered and gave a bitter smile. "Came to see the damage you caused?" Amara sat down, calm as ever. "I came to tell you something. You had a chance to use your position to protect. To serve. And you used it to feed your ego. To hurt people who trusted the badge. That damage isn't mine. It's yours." He leaned back, jaw tightening. "They'll forget. People always do." "No," Amara said. "Not this time. Because this time, the story didn't end with silence. It ended with truth." As she left the room, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. Because the next chapter was already being written. And this time, it was being written by the people who had once been forced to whisper. Now, they were speaking loud enough for the world to hear. It had been 3 weeks since the hearing where Patrice Ward stood up and shattered the silence that had surrounded her son's death. The city still buzzed with its ripple effects. Headlines had shifted from scandal to reckoning, from the name of one man to the names of many, those silenced, those forgotten, those who would no longer be invisible. Across the city, murals were being painted on crumbling brick walls, names inscribed on the concrete in bold colors like offerings to memory. In meetings and town halls, officers sat side by side with citizens, and for once, they weren't speaking to defend, they were listening. But beneath all of this, the transformation was delicate. Fragile. Amara knew how quickly it could all dissolve if left unattended. The work didn't slow down. Her office had become more than a federal command post, it was now a hub for connection, for reporting, for stories being brought forward that had never before seen light. She had created a small civilian coalition within the bureau itself, not as a symbol but as a structure, one where people could speak without fear of being buried under bureaucracy. She personally vetted every case that came through. At night, she reviewed footage alone under dim lights. She found herself learning new names, new heartbreaks, each one adding to the weight already on her chest, but she carried it willingly. Because now she wasn't just uncovering a crime. She was helping build a different future. One afternoon, Naomi entered Amara's office without knocking, holding a folder that was thinner than most but visibly important. She sat down across from Amara, her expression serious. "This one's complicated," Naomi said, placing the folder on the desk. "It's not about evidence tampering or abuse. It's about silence. About an officer who witnessed something and kept quiet. He's come forward now." Amara opened the folder and scanned the statement. A patrol officer named Darren Lynch, who had worked under Cole's supervision for years, was requesting immunity in exchange for cooperation. His testimony didn't involve direct misconduct, but it implicated higher-ups who had routinely instructed officers to look the other way when protocols were ignored. He says he was told to keep his mouth shut, Naomi added. And he did. For years. But he says it's eating him alive. Amara closed the file and looked at her. Do you believe him? Naomi nodded slowly. I believe he wants to make it right. I just don't know if that's enough anymore. Later that evening, Amara met Darren at a secure location inside a government building. He was in his early 40s, tall, with tired eyes and hands that trembled slightly even when he was still. He didn't wear a uniform anymore. He had taken a leave of absence the moment Cole's arrest went public. Amara watched him carefully as he took a seat across from her. I don't know what you want from me, he said quietly. I can't undo what I didn't stop. I don't want you to undo anything, Amara replied. But I need you to be honest. Why now? He looked down at his hands, then back at her. Because I saw what happened to Elijah Ward. I saw the bruises. I heard the way Cole spoke to the guards afterward. I knew it wasn't suicide. And I didn't say a damn thing. I just went home that night and kissed my daughter goodnight and told myself I was just following orders. Amara's voice stayed steady. You were complicit. I know, he whispered, eyes glistening. And I hate myself for it. She let the silence stretch between them. Not to punish him, but to allow the truth of what he'd said to sit in the air without flinching. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer. Guilt isn't enough. But if you're willing to testify, not just about Cole, but about the system that told you to stay silent, then maybe you can help prevent another Elijah. He nodded slowly. I will. In the following days, Amara worked with the legal team to build a new case based on Darren's statement. His testimony opened doors that had been closed for years. Supervisors, administrators, even legal staff were now under scrutiny. It was a web that expanded far beyond what anyone had anticipated. And with each name, each file uncovered, Amara realized just how deep this would go. It was not a matter of finding a single thread to pull, it was a matter of untangling decades of protection, complicity, and fear. But amidst the momentum, Amara found herself facing something she hadn't yet confronted: fatigue. Not just the kind that came from work, but the kind that came from living in the fire every single day. One night, she found herself back in her childhood home, sitting on the same porch swing where her mother used to braid her hair. Her father, now retired, sat beside her with a glass of lemonade in his hand, his gaze steady on the stars above them. You look tired, he said. I am. You also look like you finally understand what I meant when I said you'd have to carry more than your badge. She smiled faintly. Yeah. I do. He turned to her. Then let me remind you of something. Carrying it doesn't mean you carry it alone. You hear me? She nodded. He placed his hand gently on hers. You're doing good work, baby. But you're still human. Don't forget to breathe. The words lingered with her in the days that followed. She began delegating more, trusting the coalition she had built, empowering others to step forward. She met with school boards, helped build new training modules for officers, and partnered with grassroots organizers to implement community healing sessions. These were not dramatic moments, they didn't make the news, but they were powerful. Quiet revolutions that would shape the next generation. One evening, she received an invitation to attend a memorial ceremony. A wall had been commissioned in the center of the city, a public monument to honor those who had been wrongfully harmed by law enforcement. At first, she hesitated. She didn't want the spotlight. But something told her this wasn't about her. When she arrived, she saw Patrice there, standing in front of Elijah's name carved into the wall. She walked over, the crowd silent in reverence, and the two women stood side by side without speaking for a long time. Then Patrice turned to her, her voice soft but unwavering. "You gave me back my voice." Amara replied gently, "You always had it. The world just wasn't listening." Patrice took her hand. "Now they are." As the ceremony ended, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the names etched in stone. Amara looked out at the crowd, faces she knew, faces she didn't, all united by the same unspoken truth: this was not the end. This was the foundation. And somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the weight and the scars and the sleepless nights, something new stirred, hope not born of naivete, but of resilience. Because the storm had passed. But the rebuilding had just begun. Months passed. What had started as a flashpoint of justice evolved into an undeniable movement, one that no longer depended on headlines or individual arrests, but on the slow, deliberate restructuring of an entire system. Charlotte was no longer just the city where it happened. It had become a symbol of reckoning, a place where silence had finally been pierced, and accountability wasn't just spoken, it was enforced. Federal oversight remained, but the leadership of reform had shifted into the hands of the very people who had once been left out of the conversation. What emerged wasn't perfect. It was messy. It was hard. But it was real. And it was working. Cole Henderson's trial became one of the most closely followed in the state's history. The courtroom was filled not with press-hungry theatrics but with carefully laid out evidence, damning testimonies, and the quiet but irrefutable truth of his legacy. Darren Lynch's words on the stand were devastating. He didn't cry. He didn't plead. He simply told the truth, every syllable a confession that echoed beyond the walls of that courtroom. When Patrice took the stand, she didn't speak with anger. She spoke with purpose. She humanized Elijah in a way no report ever could. She ended with a simple sentence that broke everyone in the room: "If my son had been treated like someone's child instead of someone's problem, he'd be alive today." The jury didn't take long. Guilty on multiple counts: conspiracy, obstruction of justice, falsification of records, and criminal negligence resulting in death. Cole didn't speak when the verdict was read. His eyes never lifted. When he was led away, no applause followed. Just silence. The kind of silence that carried weight. The kind that marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. Naomi was offered a permanent leadership position in the Federal Oversight Division for Ethical Policing, and she accepted it with one condition: that she could build her team her way. That team included community advocates, civilian auditors, trauma psychologists, and most importantly, Amara. But Amara declined a full-time role. She had something else in mind. Amara founded the Elijah Project, a national nonprofit dedicated to reforming police training and rebuilding trust between law enforcement and communities of color. She partnered with educators, policymakers, and activists from across the country. The project became a bridge between justice and healing, between punishment and transformation. Through it, she trained officers not just on protocol, but on humanity. She led workshops on implicit bias, community mediation, and restorative justice. She pushed for policies that removed toxic officers from the pipeline before they ever got a badge. And every city she entered remembered her not as the agent who took down Cole Henderson, but as the woman who never let power blind her to purpose. Jamal became the director of youth advocacy within the project, launching mentorship programs in neighborhoods often overlooked and underfunded. He told his story, over and over, not as a victim but as proof that standing up, even when it's hard, even when it's terrifying, can change everything. His work empowered teens to believe that justice wasn't something far away, it was something they could demand, and something they could become. Patrice became a public speaker, but only on her terms. She visited schools, spoke at vigils, and joined panels, not because she enjoyed the spotlight, but because she knew how many mothers were still sitting in silence. Her voice became a lifeline for others who had lost and a reminder that grief, when given purpose, can reshape the world. And Amara, she chose peace without stepping away from the fight. She bought a modest home just outside the city, with a porch swing that reminded her of childhood. She planted a garden. She slept. She laughed. She built a life not defined by struggle, but strengthened by having survived it. But every month, without fail, she returned to the wall where Elijah's name was etched, and she read every new name added, ensuring they were remembered not for how they were taken, but for what they left behind. There was no finish line. No perfect conclusion. But there was closure. There was progress. And there was power, power recentered, power reclaimed, power redirected toward the people who had always deserved it. Not the corrupt. Not the privileged. But the brave. The unseen. The unheard. Until now. This story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even just about justice. It was about what happens when someone chooses to rise, not loudly, not violently, but with a steady refusal to be erased. It was about what shifts when a single voice breaks through the silence, and others follow. It was about Amara, yes, but also about Patrice. About Jamal. About Elijah. About every person who ever thought they were alone in their fight and learned, finally, that they weren't. Now, I want to speak directly to you, the one listening right now. Maybe you've witnessed injustice. Maybe you've felt invisible. Maybe you've stayed quiet out of fear or exhaustion or the weight of believing nothing would ever change. But let this story remind you that silence is not the end. That truth has a way of rising when you least expect it. And that you, your voice, your story, your strength, matter more than you've been led to believe. Ask yourself this: what would you do if you were in Amara's place? Would you stay silent, or would you stand up, knowing the cost, and speak for someone who can't? We want to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments. Tell us how this story moved you, challenged you, or reminded you of someone you know. Let this not just be a story you heard, but a story that lives on through you. And if this story impacted you, if you believe in the power of truth, resilience, and unexpected redemption, then subscribe to Tales of Twist. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and join us for more stories that don't just entertain, they transform. Until next time, keep listening, keep questioning, and above all, keep believing in the power of the turn.